morning. Did y'all have a good Labor Day weekend?
No.
No? So overrated.
Feels about that.
Yeah. So glad to see y'all back in class. We're going to do a little recap like we normally do before we dive into a whole new set of theories. And so luckily I came across like my little mind maps that I do for y'all, or concept maps. I made one in the past on paper, so instead of having to continually rewrite it on the board, maybe this will help. So I just want to refresh our memories of where we've been and where we're going. So we started out defining leadership, what it is, the definition of it, all the different components of it. We talked about this idea that we need to talk about leader versus manager. We also talked about power, because since such a huge part of leadership is influencing, getting people to do what you want, given what's available, we needed to talk about power and how we use those 5 bases of power. And so then we dived into our first set of theories, which were our trait theories. And we said, okay, this is all about who the leader is. And we said trait theories can be characteristics, they can be your personality. We talked about great man theory, and just this idea that really trait theory supports the notion that leaders are born rather than leaders are made. So we talked about 5 major traits, the 5-factor model, or the big 5 of personality and emotional intelligence. From there, we dove into last week behavior theory, right? Any of this look familiar to y'all? Instead of being who the leader is, this is about what the leader does or how the leader acts. And we said everything's going to be based off of this idea of task and relationship orientation. And so we said that, there were 2 major studies, one done at Ohio State and one done at the University of Michigan. Both of them identified these task and relationship orientations in leaders, or these behaviors, but they call them different things. Then we talked about the Blake and Mouton leadership grid that said, we're going to take this idea of task and relationship. We don't think you're one or the other. We think you can be a little bit of both. And we're going to call them styles. And so they came up with 5 styles depending on your amount of task orientation versus your amount of relationship orientation. Anybody remember off the top of their head what they called task and relationship? Concern for, both of them start with a P. You either are concerned for people or production, right? So task would be the concern for production. Relationship would be the concern for people. And then on Thursday, for those of you that were here, kudos to them. If you haven't watched the video from class on Thursday, they did a phenomenal job. We talked about the leadership continuum, which was a little different outlook on this idea of task and relationship, because they said it's maybe not so much about your orientation, but because of your task and relationship orientation, how much do you let followers be a part of the decisions that you make? And they give 3 styles, so a little bit different than Blake and Mouton. Blake and Mouton have 5. Leadership continuum has 3. They said you're either an autocratic leader, a democratic leader, somewhere on that continuum, or you're laissez-faire, or laissez-faire in French. What does laissez-faire mean? What type of leader is that? Are they task or relationship oriented? Or is it a trick question? They're neither. They're nothing. It's the absence of leadership, okay? So it's important to know that. And you can see here, I've got a bunch of different arrows. I told you, I think one thing that's really helpful with concept mapping is you can create these connections and see how some of the theories overlap. And so we can see that in the leadership continuum theory, the democratic leader style is pretty similar to that team leader of Blake and Mouton, whereas a laissez-faire leader is pretty similar to impoverished. Autocratic, it's pretty similar to what we would consider authority compliance. So just helpful as y'all kind of make your own concept maps to know where that all goes. So today, we're taking a little bit, it's going to seem like we're going backwards a little bit. Remember, I told y'all this isn't going to be necessarily a linear class. but we're going to introduce concepts at the appropriate time. And now's a good time as we start saying, okay, if we just look at who the leader is, that's not answering all of our questions about the leadership process. If we just look at what the leader does, that's not answering all of our questions. And so we talked a little bit on Thursday towards the end about what was missing, and we said we haven't mentioned anything about followers yet, and we haven't mentioned anything about the context. Before we can talk about those two things, though, we need to understand a little bit more about that power dynamic. So even though we've talked about power bases, we've only really talked about it from the perspective of the leader, that we have these forms of power, or these power bases that we can use to get people to do what we want. But if we're going to start adding in some variables to the leadership process, we've got to know more about the other side. And that's where this week's conversation is going to come into play. So we're backing up here, all right? We're going back to this idea of influence and power. But what we're going to pull in today is this idea of motivational theories. Why people do what they do, okay? So I can use a power base all day long, and I have a pretty good idea why it works, why people do what I want them to do. But I don't really know why people are doing what they want to do, right? Like, I'm not in their heads. I don't know. And motivation theory is what helps us understand that. So we're going to go through, and my goal for today is for us to get through 3 or 4 of the theories, and then we'll finish up the rest on Thursday, okay? So there's quite a bit. I apologize that this is going to be more of a lecture style this week, but kind of given our constraints, that's what we've got to go with for this week in class. All right. Everybody feel like you're on the same page of how we got to motivation theories?
So is it coming off of power, or is it coming off of leadership?
It's coming off of the definition of leadership. So power had to do with that idea of influencing. Motivation has to do with that too. But think about power as like being the leader-centered perspective, and now we're switching to more of the follower-centric perspective on why people do what they do or how we get them to do. Because do we use motivation theories to get people to do what we want? Yeah. Good question, Brie. Now, if I can get this to all come back on, it'd be lovely. All right, perfect. Let's turn that on. So, motivation. What is motivation? How do y'all describe what motivation is? I don't know why that popped up. Willingness to do something. What else?
What makes someone want to do something?
What makes someone want to do something? What else? How else would you describe, like when you say you're motivated or you're not motivated, what do you mean by that? You want to do it, you don't want to do it. What things impact your motivation? Like for you, how do you make the decision of whether you're motivated to do something or not?
Like the reward or the outcome.
The reward or the outcome. So you try to think a little bit further in the future. What else?
Is it something I like to do?
Do you like to do it or not, right? What is something you're motivated to do that you like to do?
Be in the outdoors.
Okay, what is something you don't like to do?
I like this class, but normally any other class, I don't really care for it.
Just kind of school in general, would you say? You're not going to offend me by saying that. I am 100% a realist that not everyone enjoys the learning process and being in school, so it doesn't offend me at all. It's part of my job to figure out how to get y'all motivated, right? We'll kind of come back to that. So I have some questions for you. How would y'all describe the motivation of these people? Okay, we're going to kind of go one by one.
Oh, I'm looking right at you, Big Daddy.
Do y'all watch Seinfeld? Sorry, okay. If you weren't awake, now you are. So, a woman who has to be home by 6:30 each night to watch reruns of Seinfeld. How do you describe her motivation? What's your first gut reaction? And maybe it's not Seinfeld, maybe it's Grey's Anatomy, maybe it's some other show. Routine. Okay, so this person's motivated by routine. How many of y'all would say this person doesn't seem motivated? That's kind of your first. Why do you feel that way?
I feel like the priorities are in the wrong places. A lot of other things that could be done or that need to be done. And if you're blocking that from off every day, what do you do?
Okay, so out of place priorities would be one. Okay. How would you describe a 35-year-old man who lives at home with his mother and doesn't have a job? Say it. I know what you just thought. Say it. Huh? Not motivated. What else? Mama's boy? Lazy. What are some other words you would use to describe this person? Huh? Entitled? Okay. A 28-year-old woman married to a sugar daddy who spends most of her free time shopping and socializing. Smart! Yes! Fascinating that that's an okay freeloader, but the one above isn't. Just saying. But I heard smart. How else would you describe this person?
She has her priorities right.
She has I like how she's prioritizing. What else? Any other dissenting opinions of how you would describe this person? I would call this person lazy.
Yeah, definitely someone that doesn't know how to work for herself.
Definitely.
Well, she's working.
She's working.
Don't worry about that.
It just depends on what we define as work, right? Sorry. A father of 5 who spends every weekend with his buddies fishing the local hotspots. How would you describe this
Or
person?
what motivates him,
Or just how would you describe them?
I think that's okay. 5 kids, you need a break.
Every weekend?
5 kids, you need a break.
I think it's kind of like the same person, same as the first one. It's priorities are in the wrong spot.
Okay, so doesn't seem to prioritize things well.
I mean, I would assume that he goes to work 5 days a week.
is his buddies not his kids?
I can tell you in my dad's situation it wasn't. This is what my dad grew up with. My grandpa didn't take his kids with him. Mm-mm.
I think it was,
My dad tried,
if it was
but it-
every other weekend, say the dad did it and the mom did it, because that's what my parents did, because they prioritized me and my friends, and
I heard some of my friends.
well, that's discipline.
So we're questioning their priorities a little bit here, okay? Oh. So here's the thing. When we see situations like this, and we go to describe people, right, and I asked y'all, I said, would you vote whether this person's motivated or unmotivated? What would y'all say for the woman that watches reruns of Seinfeld every night? Motivated or unmotivated?
I think she's motivated. She has to keep a very strict schedule if she does want to be home by 6:30.
But what if she's that person that always leaves things halfway done at work, but she makes sure she's out the door every day at 5 o'clock?
I feel like we have enough information.
But this is the information we got, right? Do we always have all the information on people? No. But are we quick to make judgment calls?
Oh,
Yes, very much so, right? The 35-year-old man who lives at home with his mom and doesn't have a job. What could maybe be some additional information that we don't have about this?
His mother's sick.
His mom's sick. maybe she's in hospice care and he's chosen to stay home, right? Like, we need that like additional 3 sentences afterwards. But again, sometimes all we're given is a sentence about things or about people. And we make these judgment calls on whether they're motivated or not motivated. 28-year-old woman, right? What if it's a 28-year-old woman who's funding her education? Or, I mean, because that's like a real thing happening. Y'all know?
I knew somebody in college that did that.
Really? Yeah. I mean, it happens.
That's intelligence.
But it's interesting. So we're really quick to say, you know, again, when people don't happen to have the same priorities as we do, we're really quick to say they're either motivated or unmotivated, right? What are other situations that we have a tendency to make this quick judgment call?
Ooh, like a friend that has multiple jobs but doesn't really want to share that with the group, and that's why they can't like attend things.
Yeah. Or what about even the student in class who seems like that pretty, like, I don't want to say mediocre student, because again, C is average. Average is good. I would like for us to change the connotation of grades. But anyways, see, can I get an amen? Anyways.
Us again, kids were just talking about that. Like, that's not always something you can see that a student has. Like, and a lot of people, like, they don't even,
Yeah. So, I mean, honestly, most of the time the students that I have that are the best students are the students that maybe aren't always making the A, but they're working and they tend to kind of manage their time a little bit better. Like, there's all this stuff. But from a school standpoint, are there faculty or professors who might look at that student and think they're unmotivated to be in school? Yes. Absolutely. I, on the flip side, would say they obviously must be very motivated because they're working a job to pay their way to get through school. That's a whole nother decision, right? Conversation there. But again, when people's values, when the things that they prioritize don't line up with ours, we're really, really quick to say they must not be motivated.